Good afternoon, and welcome to City Club of Portland Friday Forum. I'm John Horvick, City Club President, and I'd like to welcome members and guests alike. Those of you who join us today at the Governor Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB Radio or watching on Portland Community Media. Today, we'll find out what's next for Portland's soccer scene when Craig Birnbach interviews Merritt Paulson. But first, some announcements. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners ensures we put on the state's best civic programs week after week. I'd like to thank our media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine. Our current Friday Forum sponsors are Gavin Mesher, Iberdrola Renewables, Perkins Coie, Portland General Electric, and Providence Health and Services. We are grateful for your support and commitment to City Club's mission. Please join me in a warm round of applause for all of them. At next week's forum, we will honor the 40th anniversary of the mission of women to City Club. The forum will celebrate women's civic leadership both inside and outside the club since the 1970s. Also next week, City Club is hosting events on Oregon's health insurance exchange and transparency in the state legislature. There's also an opportunity to volunteer for Fame Academy with New Leaders Collective at the next Mix and Serve. You can learn more about these and other club events, purchase tickets, and become a member on our website, pdxcityclub.org. As always, City Club will be live tweeting today's event. You can follow or mention us at pdxcityclub, and be sure to use the hashtag CityClub in your own tweets. We'll be having a Q&A session with our guests at the end of today's program. Members, please come to the microphone to ask your question. For all our audience participants, please locate the index cards on the center of your tables and write your questions on them during the forum. We'll collect them prior to the start of the Q&A. And now to our program. Today, we find out from Merritt Paulson what it's been like to go from a Major League Soccer startup to selling out season tickets, to being atop the Western Conference and competing for a championship. We'll also hear his perspective on the public-private deal that made the Timbers possible. Merritt Paulson is owner and president of the Portland Timbers and Portland Thorns. He's been named to Sports Business Journal's exclusive 40 Under 40 3 years in a row for bringing a second Major League sports franchise to Portland and transforming Jeld-Wen Field into one of the most intimate sports venues in the country. Under Merritt's leadership, the Timbers have sold out all of their regular season home games, developed award-winning marketing campaigns, and transformed the region's sporting landscape by creating one of the most authentic and exciting in-game experiences in sports. In 2012, Merritt's leadership helped bring professional women's soccer back to Portland. This year, the Portland Thorns attracted record-setting crowds and were crowned champions in the inaugural season of the National Women's Soccer League. Merritt Paulson will be interviewed today by Craig Birnbach. Craig is an Emmy Award-winning sports director at KATU-TV. Prior to K2, he was a sports anchor in Charleston, South Carolina, where he won an Associated Press Awards for his coverage of the Clemson-South Carolina football rivalry and the Cooper River Bridge Run. Craig grew up in New Jersey and remains loyal to the New York Yankees, Giants, Knicks, and Rangers. Please join me in welcoming them both to the stage.
Thank you, everybody. I've already realized why the City Club is such a great organization, because I brought note cards. They brought note cards. Timbers green, smarter than me. Not quite Timbers green, but green nonetheless. So
I've got no note cards.
You don't need them. That's the difference between you and I also. I'm going to start with a question that John gave me. He said, Timbers in the Western Conference Finals, which is fantastic and awesome, but down 4-2 against Real Salt Lake. Next Sunday's the game. How are you guys going to come back?
I'd say I'm not going to give anybody any locker room material from the answer to that question, but win or lose, it's going to be an unbelievably exciting game. I think we're going to come at them hard and we're going to come at them fast. I have a good feeling about it, but we'll see. You never know. It was really an unfortunate way to start the series, to beat Seattle and have 3 days and be the #1 seed and not have a choice of home or away and have to fly to an altitude destination. I'm not a big excuse guy. It's after the fact at this point in time, and it is a reality. And I think that was a factor in Game 1, but we'll see what happens in Game 2.
Of course, to get this far, you've had a great turnaround season. First ever MLS playoff appearance, and it just happens to be against a team from up north, the biggest rivals, the Seattle Sounders. If the Army were here, we'd hear boos and hisses right now. So
there's some Army here.
There we go. Obviously, the Sounders, that rivalry is what's called the best rivalry in American/North American soccer. It's been amazing. They entered a little bit before you, had a little bit more success early. Some people, nobody in this room, tabbed Portland the little brother to Seattle. What did it mean for the franchise and you as an owner to play them in your first ever MLS playoff experience and eliminate them?
I liked it. You're probably not going to hear a lot of talk about little brother after the playoffs, and frankly, we beat them 3 times in a row, which is tough to do against any team. We had that late regular season game. Somebody asked me, I did an interview with the Portland Business Journal, and he asked, the playoffs hadn't happened yet, and he'd asked if that victory against Seattle was one of the best victories. And I said, look, I like every win. Certainly maybe appreciated that a bit more because it was Seattle, but we've certainly beat Seattle plenty of times in the regular season, whether in the USL or even MLS. We'd beaten them last year, but wait for the playoffs. If we knock them out of the playoffs, it'll be a little bit sweeter. So, it was a statement, and there's going to be many more epic battles versus Seattle in years to come. But I'd say it was the right way to start our foray into playoff soccer and Major League Soccer.
Anyone who gets the privilege, like I do sometimes, to be on the field after the games. I don't know how much he danced at your wedding, but I do know he dances quite a bit with the Army after victories, and it's wonderful to see an owner with that much energy and enthusiasm. But let's go back a little bit, talk about how we got here. And John talked about the private-public deal to bring MLS here, which began with the stadium because the stadium had to be soccer-specific, which it was not at the time. It was a $40 million deal. And
I know you actually, the City Club here had it as a $31 million deal, which they actually saved me some money. I noticed, but it was a $40 million.
Right, and as I said, it's his money, so he's the one who's going to be more worried about it. But the process, I think it's fair to say, was not an easy one. I think you attended probably more meetings, private and public, than you intended. Now, here we are 3 years later. Is there a feeling of vindication? Is there any "I told you so" in you for the people that doubted it, that it would work?
Well, I actually had a very full head of hair when I started the process with the city of Portland to do the deal. It's funny, I was talking with former Mayor Adams a little bit before this event started and reminiscing a bit. And, when people look at our great atmosphere and everything that this has meant for the city of Portland on and off the field, they forget how close Major League Soccer to Portland was from not happening. I mean, we literally, through everything we went through, all the ups and downs and changes, we went into that decisive last meeting to the last vote, not knowing how the commissioner who was voting was going to vote. It was a 3-2 win, and Dan Salzman came through with the final vote. In terms of vindication or "I told you so," I absolutely don't feel any of that whatsoever. It's good to have public forum. People are always going to have differing views on any big ideas. It was a very long process, though. It did give me a little bit of an insight into how Portland works and how decisions get made here. And, I think we actually did a tally for something that Business Week or another magazine did just for a little pop-up window, which was the number of articles that had been written about this deal in the course of the year. And it was something like 154 articles in the Oregonian alone in 1 year on MLS to PDX. And, you know, the city was committing basically $15 million to the deal, which is, while a significant amount of money, de minimis amount of money relative to 100 other public projects that get a fraction of the attention this got. And this had the backdrop of being an entertainment deal in a time when we were going through the biggest recession since the Great Depression, and so optics, you know, we had some challenges there, certainly. But it got an inordinate amount of attention, to say the least, you know, and credit to the city leaders, and especially Mayor Adams and Randy Leonard for championing this, because it was the right thing to do. The one thing I really do feel is you know, when we went through this, I said it's not going to cost any taxpayers any money, so we were blue in the face. Said it would be a great thing for the city, said it would create a lot of jobs, and there was a percentage of people that just didn't believe us there. You know, no matter what facts and anything you put out in front of them, you're lying. Well, it's nice. It is nice to come back and say, okay, told you. You know, I guess that's the one I told you so, because it's a good lesson.
And I would say, people that follow other Major League sports entering cities, it was, as you said, a much smaller need and ask, a change of a stadium, not building a stadium. You talked about those meetings, those articles, and I know it's a sensitive issue because you don't want to offend anyone in particular, but you've been through the process. The process could happen again if we're lucky. I cover sports. The more teams we get, the better. What would you fix? What would you change to make the process maybe not as much easier, but more productive and maybe less waste?
You know, at a macro view, not just with what we did, but, you know, what I see happening in a couple other areas. We talk about Portland being Soccer City USA in the context of the Timbers. You know, it's Process City USA in some ways in the context of getting deals done. And it does seem to me at times that there's an inordinate spotlight put on the vocal minority opposition for whatever the issue at stake might be. And, you know, you got to ask yourself, is this Portland, Oregon, or Hackensack, New Jersey, or something like that? You know, let's act like a big city and have a little bit more conviction in getting big things done, because no big idea there is. Any big idea there is going to have opposition. And so, yes, that opposition needs to be heard, but, you know, I think that, you know, for a progressive city, there's the paradox in Portland where there's a real reticence to change, and, you know, you do have to change to evolve. So, you know, I guess I'd like to see a bit of streamlining. I mean, at the end of the day, people stepped up and, you know, it wasn't the deal that we originally envisioned, but we got the big piece of it done. And so I don't want to do anything that sounds ungrateful relative to that outcome. We had city leaders that stepped up. We were fortunate to have the city leaders in office that were in office when I went through that. But I would like to see there be a little bit more streamlining on you know, decision making, I guess, at the municipal level.
I will say, you know, I like you because you just kind of picked on New Jersey, and I'm staying, but it's okay.
That wasn't by accident.
You talk about the process, and it wasn't the deal that you originally wanted, and one big piece of that deal was your baseball team, the Portland Beavers, which you had to sell based on not being able to get a stadium, not getting the deal you wanted. Is that something that you look back on that still, you know, kind of bites you?
You know, I'm not somebody who spends a lot of time looking in the rearview mirror, just in general, whether they're positives or negatives. I did have a conversation with Chris McGowan, who's the new president of the Blazers, the other day. Good guy. I think he's going to be speaking here in a couple of weeks, and we were talking about how that really was the perfect solution for the Rose Quarter, you know, and the development that could have happened there, which is a little bit ironic because the Blazers leadership at the time wasn't necessarily in favor of AAA moving to Memorial Coliseum. But I think that was the right fit and the right solution. It's unfortunate it didn't happen because you've still got an issue that cost the city a lot of money in Memorial Coliseum and really no fix out there. And you've got an entire area of real estate that really hasn't been activated into the, you know, sort of leisure destination that was the original vision. In terms of me missing it, you know, I'm every bit engaged in what I'm doing right now, and you know, I don't know how I'd have enough hours in the day if we were doing both. I'm sure we'd figure it out. But you know, it's nice that the Hillsborough Hops came back to the Portland area. It's not in Portland downtown proper. It's suburban, but it's still professional minor league baseball coming back to Portland. So I feel good about that.
You did lose the Beavers, but we got a nice round of applause for the other team that you gained. The Portland Thorns, in their first year in the NWSL, wins a championship. You were the only MLS owner to step up and purchase a women's professional soccer team. Which to me, on the outside looking in, was surprising, because here you have people that love soccer, champion soccer in our country, and none of them, other than you, stepped up and brought the women's professional team to your stadium. Why did you make that decision, and why do you think other owners didn't?
It's a good question. One reason, you know, actually my wife Heather's sitting here in the audience. She was a big fan of the idea. You know, we've got 2 girls at home, and you know, when the Sunil Gulati, the head of U.S. Soccer, called me and said, we're doing this new league, I really need you to step up. You know, it wasn't something that I'd set out to do. You'd had a couple of women's professional soccer leagues who'd launched and failed, you know, starting, you know, with the really high-profile World Cup champions, stars Mia Hamm and Brandy Chastain, and then pretty recently with WPS, women's professional soccer. And, you know, I felt it's sort of a cheesy answer, but I did feel a little bit of a moral obligation to get on board, because, you know, for women, pro soccer to ever succeed, I believe we're in the best market for that to happen in the country. If it's not going to work in Portland, it's not going to work anywhere. You look at the support UP women have had for the years, the support we always get for the women's national team. I knew we could make it work here. Now, I thought we'd lose a fair amount of money doing it, and, you know, I spent time with Mike Golub, our COO, who's also sitting here, you know, taking a look at sort of the downside analysis. What had changed fundamentally with the NWSL was U.S. Soccer was putting their money where their mouth is, and sort of changing the financial paradigm. So it definitely, you know, they were going to pay the salaries of the national team players and make it a little bit more attractive and tenable long term. You know, I really didn't want to be part of a failed effort. You know, I want this thing to be a going concern, and I want to be a big reason of why it's a going concern going forward. So, you know, I sort of added all that up and said, okay, we're going to do it. But if we do it, we got to put our best foot forward. This can't be sort of a red-haired stepchild kind of thing. You know, it's going to be under our sort of overall sporting umbrella. You know, let's do it right, and let's treat these athletes the way they should be treated. And we didn't market it as women's sports to a niche audience. We have marketed it as high-level professional soccer to soccer fans. You know, and so I think the fact that it did as well as it did, you know, I always have high expectations for our supporters and our fans, and they always exceed those expectations. I mean, it's just the reality of our existence here, and it's a great position to be in. You know, we broke to the high side of high expectations. The fact that we averaged 14,000, you know, fans a game. I'll never forget landing in PDX with the team when we played the game, and, you know, we were in Rochester, New York, and flew back in, and I got a text on my phone that said there's some fans in the airport, and, you know, you walk into the terminal and there's 3,000 people. I mean, it was insane. I had my phone out and was filming it, and, you know, I called Caleb Porter and said, Caleb, this is what it's like with the Thorns when we win a championship. I think the city's going to spontaneously combust if the Timbers win an MLS Cup. You know, so you know, it was really special.
Yeah, and you mentioned the attendance, and this is kind of good and bad. The Timbers average pretty much 3 times more than any other club in the league.
There's nothing bad about that.
It is for the other teams in the league. So,
Well, no, actually, I thought you were going to say the waiting list and everything. The attendance in the league overall is actually a pretty good story. It's a very good story. There's a lot of markets that are doing well. The soccer growth story right now is amazing. We're at the nexus of that. This is sort of ground zero for soccer in North America and the Pacific Northwest. But you look at what's going on in Kansas City and in Philadelphia and Houston, and what's going to happen with the Manchester City team in New York and Montreal, and Orlando's going to be successful. I mean, you're talking about supporters culture really starting to emerge in this country, and you're talking about impressive fan bases, impressive attendance numbers, in a lot of these teams. It wasn't necessarily, I didn't even let you ask your question, so I apologize, but it's interesting because ESPN just did the second poll of kids ages 13 or something like 11 through 22. What's your favorite professional sport? And the answer to that is staggering and telling. I mean, nobody here would be shocked to hear what number one is. It's sort of the almighty NFL. But number two, and by a considerable margin, is professional soccer. Now that includes the Premier League and soccer around the world, but the young America is very much a soccer nation right now, and we've got the youngest and most vibrant fan base of any of the sports, and not to dump on baseball, but it's a real concern for Major League Baseball right now that the average age of the World Series viewer is 57 years old. And that Little League participation is falling off a cliff. The Wall Street Journal just did a big article on that. And they've got to, engage young people. The games are too long. Soccer doesn't have that problem.
When you talk about Portland and your love affair with the fans, you also seem to have fallen in love with the city. But I want to go back. Most people here know your background. Your father, Hank Paulson, in the financial world, kind of ran the whole money thing for a while for our country. You grew up in Chicago, got your MBA, worked for the NBA, HBO, in marketing. Your goal was to own a sports franchise, but how the heck did you end up here in Portland?
Well, I mean, there's a long answer to that question. I'll try to give you the Cliff Notes version. I don't know how we're doing on time, but
we're good.
I mean, I saw a real opportunity here because you've got, if you look at population per major league team, Portland is one of the highest in the league. I mean, or in the country, excuse me. You've got the Blazers, and you don't have anything else. You've got a direct market area of 2.4 million people when you include the counties that abut Multnomah. So, it's a sports city. I mean, through the Rip City years, anybody who's been a big Blazers fan, and you look at the passion surrounding the Ducks and a whole bunch of other things, and then you look at Soccer City, USA, and the opportunity. I mean, MLS was always in my mind when we came out here, because I said, you've got a downtown facility that's a jack of many trades but a master of none, that doesn't necessarily work for AAA baseball. It's going to be really heavy lifting to get the deal done with the city to bring MLS here. But the worst case scenario, we can still, I think, do a better job with AAA, and who knows what happens in the future. But it'd be great to get a new AAA ballpark as well, and it put the Portland Beavers in a position where they're not the last team, in the league in attendance and all that other kind of stuff. So, that was, I had the first meeting I had when I finally got my family to a place where they were willing to look at sports opportunities was with Don Garber in Major League Soccer, and we talked about buying the San Jose Earthquakes, which at the time was a number well under $10 million. And it was sort of oh, by the way, you've got, you need to pay $90 million for the new stadium, and this was in 2004 and 2005. In the league, the Sounders and even, Toronto, et cetera, you hadn't had the phenomenon. I still saw the growth, but that was a really big commitment to make at that point, and so we said no, but when Portland presented itself. The other factor is, my wife was moving out here with me, and she needed to be on board from a personal standpoint, making this our home. I didn't believe in the concept of absentee ownership, and I'm actually, running the team day to day as well. So, along with Mike Golub. So, I needed to feel real good about the personal side of that, and we fell in love with the area and fell in love with the city.
Talk about love. You have this love affair with your fans, and some of them speak to you the way I do, which is via Twitter sometimes. That is not a relationship that most owners have with their fans, and I know you have cut back a little bit on how accessible you are, but can you kind of explain why you allow yourself to be that accessible and what you learned and why you kind of cut back a little bit?
Well, accessibility has always been something as an organization we strive for, and today with social media, it's easier than ever. It's a double-edged sword. But even before, I joined Twitter, which I actually waited a fair amount before I did. I'm not sure always if it's the best thing in the world that I did. But when I first came out here, I'd been told by the prior ownership group when we talked about the Timbers, look out for the Timbers Army, and you kind of want to steer clear of that area when there's Timbers game days. And I routinely walk through the Timbers Army and have conversations with folks and high five, and I enjoyed that. And I looked at, it took me of attending all of one Timbers game to say, hey, we've got something here. You've got a really vibrant supporters culture, that could only get bigger and could only get better, and they'd obviously had history, prior to my arrival. But, Twitter's back to the original question, I mean, just the social media side, I think it's a net positive, but you do have to remember, every time you tweet, it's basically a press conference, and stuff gets picked up by people you don't expect it to get picked up by, and it can be really it's a really reactionary medium. And some of the more high profile, you want to call them mistakes, I've made on Twitter last year when I took a shot at officiating and got fined, it was more premeditated than you might realize. It wasn't just an emotional reaction.
I knew it.
We'd gone through a very difficult season, and I think it had a real tough go of it. I mean, we hadn't been awarded a penalty kick all year, and there was a lot of vitriol sort of aimed at our general manager, who was then acting coach, and it was a way to take the attention away from that a little bit. Now, I didn't think I'd be doing it to the tune of a $25,000 fine, and it didn't help that when I walked on the field to go see the coaches, the officials were right there, and I had a brief conversation with them as well. But that was a little more emotional than not premeditated. But more of my point is, it can be a little less ready, fire, aim than it looks at times. But I still interact with fans on Twitter, and frankly, a lot of owners and a lot of leagues do that as well. That doesn't make me too unique. I mean, Mark Cuban's out of control on it, and I'm not trying to emulate him, believe me, especially with the officiating
or the fines.
Yeah.
You went back a little bit and kind of brought me here to last season, and we could talk about the first 2 years. I mean, success off the field was tremendous. Sold out every game. The waiting list is 6,500. That was from the beginning. But your first major decision, Mike Golub's there. That was a good decision, and that was first. But to hire a coach.
And Gavin Wilkinson.
And Gavin, yep, that was also here. But the most high-profile hiring for a new owner is the first head coach. And you went with John Spencer, and obviously the first 2 years did not go the way as planned. This year, you hired Caleb Porter, and the turnaround has been historic. What did you learn in the first process of hiring John Spencer that didn't work, that helped you in turning things around and finding Caleb Porter?
A lot. A whole lot. When we made the decision, and you never, look, anytime you hire somebody, it's as much art as it is science, and nobody's going to have a bat 1,000 there. When we came out of the gate in his expansion team, we were doing a major renovation. We were doing 100 different things, to try to meet some really tough deadlines and become a Major League Soccer team. And, I don't think that the time and effort, and going through a deeper dive, for that, because it's a really, really important hire. Not that we didn't interview a lot of candidates and everything. And nothing against, believe me, John Spencer's got some great attributes. But when we did the second round and we made the decision that ultimately it wasn't the right fit, wasn't going to be the right long-term fit with John, it was a much more detailed process. I mean, everybody we talked to came in and gave us their opinion of our entire roster. They analyzed the last several games we played. What would they do differently? If they were rebuilding the team, who would they keep? Who wouldn't they keep? Does their vision, and not with leading questions, what's their vision for how they want to play? And as an owner, that's the thing that I've got to set, and then make sure we got the right people and the right personalities in place, and be willing to step back and let them have the autonomy that they need and the time they need. And believe me, I was very sensitive to not being branded as a coach killer owner or a meddling owner, and we were making a pretty quick change. And I figured as long as we knew we were going to make it, it was better doing it sooner rather than later, and I am glad we did that. And there was a little bit of public perception issue you faced in making a decision when we did, but it was a really detailed process and a lot of time. I mean, just in my interview with Caleb, I had dinner with him twice. I watched a game with him once, probably had 2 or 3 2-hour interviews with him, and then he spent a whole nother period of time with Gavin. I mean, Gavin and he drove from Portland to Seattle to watch the Sounders in a CONCACAF game, drove back. Sean McCauley was part of that drive as well, because it was going to be a situation if Sean was on board, and Caleb was going to have the ability to bring in his own coaches, but how did he feel about Sean as well? So we really checked a lot of boxes and were very detailed, and we were with other candidates as well. And I learned a lot, by the way. There were some great candidates we interviewed who had some interesting opinions about players and how we were playing, and so it was an opportunity to learn a little bit as well.
When he says Sean, that was an assistant coach who stayed on board with Caleb. I was there for the press conference to announce the firing of John Spencer, and you were emotional. I could see it on your face that this was the last place you wanted to be, and I wondered then and couldn't ask, but why was it such an emotional thing for you to do?
Well, it wasn't a happy press conference. Right. It's a weird thing in sports where you have a press conference to basically say you fired somebody and have it be that public. I wouldn't say I was emotional. I sort of choked myself up at one point when I was relating, because I like John personally, I really do, and was close to him personally. And it's not an easy thing to go through, and to do that publicly is tough. So, but that's sports.
You talked about learning stuff from other coaches that you brought in, and I kind of always wondered, how big of a soccer fan were you growing up?
I was a fan, but I was a fan in the way that a lot of Americans are. I was a once every 4-year fan.
World Cup.
And followed the World Cups closely, and had become a fan of MLS sort of when all the time I was working at the NBA. I worked with a bunch of people who were really big soccer fans, and I started watching the EPL a fair amount, and started watching MLS, especially when I became a big believer in the growth of the sport. But it takes off to a whole nother level when you're with a team, and I was so into the Timbers in the USL. I mean, and it's funny because on the baseball side, you really don't care if your team wins you want them to win, but you do exit polling in minor league baseball, and 65% of the people who went to the game don't know who wins or loses in minor league baseball. That's a fact. And we didn't have any say in the personnel, and it was all the Padres, and they're making decisions with the minor league team that are solely to benefit the major league teams. And yet, on Timbers game days, it was just a whole nother level for me, and I developed a finer appreciation for the sport. I'm still would never call myself a soccer guy. I know a lot more than I did in 2007, but I'm never going to pretend to be somebody who's grown up in the game, grown up playing the game, grown up coaching the game. What I do know, the more I know about soccer, the more I know how little I know. Because tactically, it's an extremely nuanced game that's developing, and I've done a fair amount of reading now about the history, and you always got to remind yourself. You start to think you're an expert, and then you shouldn't be meddling as well. So I've got to know enough to evaluate, but be willing to step back.
You talk about the evaluation. You talked about Gavin Wilkinson, your general manager, who was the coach of the Timbers under the USL. And there's a lot of managers here, and there was, I think it's fair to say, a firestorm of during the terrible year last year. There was even a campaign by fans, GW out, to fire Gavin. You didn't just stand by him. You were very vocal in standing by him. You have been proven correct on that one this year. That process, that was a time when you were telling people you were stepping back and you were not reacting as much. But when it came to Gavin, you were reactionary. How did you know you were right then?
Well, I mean, I'd say I've developed a reasonably, and I stress reasonably, thick skin, especially going through the public-private deal with Portland. I mean, I had some blogger put pictures of my wife and my kids up there, and when we were doing the deal with the city of Portland, that really bothered me. And there were certain things that really bothered me, but there was a lot of criticism focused at me, and I'm pretty good at handling that, and frankly, not generally emotional or reactionary when it was targeted to me. When it's targeted to a guy who I sort of knew the full story and felt like he was being, sort of had the crosshairs misplaced on him, that was hard for me. And so, there was a history with Gavin and some people in the Timbers Army that didn't have anything to do with anything that happened last year. Then we traded a goalkeeper who made it his sole mission to throw gasoline on the flames with this whole thing, which is, by the way, one of the best trades we've ever made. And this guy was a different guy in the locker room than he sort of marketed himself to our fans, as. But I felt like, that was tough for me, and so I felt like I, needed to protect, and Gavin doesn't need anybody to protect him, so I shouldn't have, reacted. And frankly, he's a guy who lives and breathes the Timbers and literally bleeds it. He cares so much about it. It's not a job, and I also know how capable he is, and it's a good reminder to me. It was a good reminder to me that it's phenomenal that fans care and are passionate and have strong opinions. So I always respected that, and even if I didn't agree with the opinions. But you also know that fans never are going to have a full window, into everything that's going on. I mean, it's like analogous to, how are you going to criticize somebody's housekeeping if you can only look through one exterior window in the house? You get one perspective, but you can't walk around in there. You don't know why people were traded, why decisions were made, why certain things are happening. And, Seattle lets fans vote on their GM publicly every 4 years. Well, I can tell you that ain't ever going to happen in Portland. and last year is a good example of why it's not, because, they just don't, in what good GM's going to want to work for a team where fans are voting for him anyway? It's one thing when the owner's the GM, but which it is now in Seattle. So he's going to be around one way or the other. But, it's, anyway, sort of a long question. I think most people, are, even if they don't love Gavin right now, appreciate, his skills and everything he's done and his role in sort of remaking the team. And ultimately, he was the guy, who, along with me, who hired Caleb.
We've talked about the past, how you got here, the current, which is good in the Western Conference Finals. I'm often asked this question because you're often talking about growth. You sell out every game. Your waiting list is 6,500. Where is the growth with the Timbers in Portland, and maybe even a bigger question with the MLS?
Well, the growth with the MLS, I think I've already answered in talking about the growth of the sport and what's happening around the league. And one of the most exciting things to me about being in the table in the league is this is still a veritable teenager, 18 years of history. And we're still changing and we're still adapting, and having a seat at that table and being able to influence that is really exciting. I mean, it still feels entrepreneurial. I mean, it's the world sport and the really the biggest sport, but this is this is the final frontier and really the most important market in many aspects in the States, and watching the World's game finally become relevant in the U.S. is thrilling. So in terms of growth, stadium growth, I get asked the question, wouldn't you rather have a 30,000 seat venue given the demand? Not if we had to be in Hillsborough, or not if we had to be somewhere else. I mean, one of the great strengths is, downtown, west side, Portland with public transit right there. It's terrific. And so maybe, yeah, our business side gets a little bit capped at the ramifications of that. But it's still, I think, a net positive. I mean, we'll selectively try to increase capacity where we can, but the thing we're fighting is structurally, we've got concourses, on the west side that are too narrow to do anything really significant. So we're already dealing with ingress and egress challenges. But I'm not worried about us. I mean, we're in a great position, and we've got a really healthy ticket business and some terrific corporate partners as well.
I always wondered, what do your ticket people do? They can't sell anymore.
Well, I mean, it's more nuanced. We always keep a certain amount of tickets. On a game by game, we could do season tickets for our full capacity if we wanted to. 8,000 seat waiting list right now, and about 22,000 or 20,500, excuse me, capacity. But they were really busy with the Thorns, and we do separate events and one-off games and that kind of stuff. So they should be busy with some additional tournaments, et cetera, next year. That some soccer media, Timbers Army people in the audience will know what I'm talking about, but nobody else will have alluded to that we may or may not have already qualified for. But
it's big. It's big.
Anyway.
I think it's right about that time where I have to go from script. I've done my job, but I haven't done it well enough. So now we open it up to others. So we're gonna now take questions from the audience. As always, we invite members to the microphone to ask their questions. Asking questions at the Friday Forum microphone is a benefit of City Club membership, and membership is open to everyone. Before asking your question, please identify yourself as a City Club member and ask your question in 30 seconds or less. I'm also going to ask some questions for the audience member index cards. So you're supposed to hold those up high right now if you have any on cards, so somebody from the City Club can come collect them and bring them to me. So,
Win Wakala, City Club member. With Lincoln High School being so close, is there any possibility of doing something with them to build something over there that would help expand things and help the high school? And then also I have a second question. Any chance of getting Crazy George to come up for a game?
I'm not. Who's Crazy George? Is that the old mascot? That's
yes.
I know.
He started the Wave 25 years ago.
I hear him talked about from time to time. I think he's pretty much a relic somewhere in our.
Oh, I think he's still on contract with like 3 major teams.
Timber Joey would take a chainsaw to that guy pretty quickly if he came
Crazy
out right
George
now.
George is great. He hand glides into games and parachutes and everything.
Your first question, Peyton Chapman's a good friend, the principal over at Lincoln, and I think we were helpful to them in trying to get their football field and multi-use field returfed, and we always try to be a good neighbor and help them. As in terms of like if there's any ways that we could work together on expansion, who knows? It's a good question. There's one thing I have in mind, but not something I'm definitely can talk about publicly yet. But we try to be a good partner with them. Thank you.
Bill Dickey, City Club member. I wanted to ask you, how you came about the decision to support gay marriage in Oregon. It was amazing, and I know there's a lot of people that are grateful for a major league sports team coming out in favor of that. And I just wondered how you came across, how you made that decision.
Good question. In the Blazers, actually, did that too, so they should get credit. It was a tough one for me when I was approached, just because I don't think politics and sports should mix, and I think that people from any kind of ideology or belief, right side of the table, left side, should be able to come together in a sporting venue with the common goal of cheering the team for wins and losses, and I never want to be perceived as having sort of an agenda with my team. That said, on the marriage equality issue, it struck me as more of a human rights case and a little bit different, and so we made an exception there, and endorsed that effort.
I'm just going to take a break from the microphone and go to a card here. This question is, what impact has Title IX had on making the Thorns possible, and what more can be done to make women's professional sports financially successful?
Well, Title IX's been crucial in making it possible. It opened up a whole realm of new opportunities and new doors for women in sports. The interesting thing, though, that goes out the wayside when you talk about professional sports. Professional sports is free market. People are either going to pay to watch it or they're not going to pay to watch it. And so for women's pro sports to be viable, there needs to be a market out there and there needs to be an audience. And, we've proven with the Thorns that there can be. And there is a place for women's professional soccer and women's professional sports. I mean, really, the Thorns were, in many ways, the most successful women's professional sports team in any league, not just women's professional soccer, certainly in the United States. Using a variety of metrics, based on our first year's performance. And we need more than 1 year of history, but I believe that women's pro sports, there's a place for women's pro sports to succeed and flourish if it's done right.
Chris Andre, City Club member, thanks so much for being here. I am a huge Timbers fan, as are other members of my family, and we're really glad to hear you here today at the City Club. Unfortunately, regarding politics, this question does have a political edge, but, just be glad that the other two, sex and religion, are off the agenda here. My question is regarding corporate sponsorship. I do believe that you cannot understand politics in America without understanding sports and that special relationship. That said, the NSA recently gave a tremendous amount of money to AT&T for handing over a tremendous amount of customers' information. Do you, as an amazingly ethical leader of this sports franchise, this sports team, have concerns or take a look at some of the corporate sponsors and can take into consideration that?
Thank you. I think we always, anytime we enter into a partnership with any of our private sector partners, we want to make sure that our core values and their core values are synced. We put a tremendous amount of priority on working with local companies that employ a lot of people in the Portland area. If we had any ethical concerns about what a corporation was doing in their broader business, I promise you we would not accept a partnership with them. So, it's definitely something that we look at to make sure that our core values are linked up.
Jeff McCarthy, a City Club member. Just a quick story question or another question. Went to the match last week, showed up with three of us. I had a transfer. My two buddies, intending to buy a ticket at the match, got nailed for $175, fare evasion. I know TriMet has to do that, but I wonder if we could have a little slack policy. In fact, it's the only place I've ever seen so many fare inspectors is at the games. And the second question is, you may have answered this already, I apologize if you did. There's some sections of the stadium blanked off. Why can't you use those for more season tickets?
Let me tackle those in reverse order. It's actually not large sections of the stadium that are still tarp, but we do have a couple on the west side, and the answer there is something I alluded to earlier, which is the main concourse width, which, you know, we feel like there's so much congestion when people are trying to go to concession stands, go to the bathroom, get in and out of the stadium, you know, and sort of the throughput areas, which are your main concourses, that we've taken a hard look at it and said, we think we're close to the tipping point of having enough people in there. Now, we're okay by fire codes and that kind of stuff, and we're costing ourselves money in the near term. We'd like to sell those seats. But, you know, it's something that Mike's taken a look at as well, and we may open up a little more and start to see, you know, now that we feel pretty good about where we are right now. And your first part of the question, I think, was why can't the Max be a free fare zone coming through on game day, which, you know, we'd love. They make their own policies. We actually do provide Max tickets to season ticket holders at a fair amount of cost to us, and we have a high percentage of our season ticket holders who attend games through public transportation and through the Max.
Hi, Alex Cousins, City Club member, and fifth season as a season ticket holder. And
Thank you.
Yes, sure thing. Can you explain the Clint Dempsey acquisition in a way that makes sense for anybody? And would you also be looking for a similar opportunity from the league in the future?
That is one question I did not expect to get today. Okay, I don't want to get myself into trouble. I really don't. You know, Clint Dempsey was a big addition to the league to have somebody who's 30 years old of his profile. I mean, we need to have the best American stars in the league. I think the league needs to be more transparent with some of the rules. There wasn't back office tinkering going on like the perception may have existed that people were in the league office were trying to do Seattle any favors. My issue with that had to do to our position in what's known as the allocation ranking order, and the fact that I felt like we were entitled to something, you know, and if Clint wasn't going to come to Portland, then we had at least had the ability to be at the table there and benefit, you know, and that ultimately didn't happen, and there was a disagreement. I do think it's a net positive, you know, that he came back to MLS. Obviously a tough first year for him, but you know, I expect him to be a good player next year. Was that enough of an answer? Probably didn't illuminate it as much as you'd like, but I try to toe the line a little bit.
Leslie Johnson, City Club member. Thanks very much for coming, Mr. Paulson. As somebody who played in early phases of the rec leagues here in town back in the 80s, it's a thrill to see Portland achieve this stature in the professional leagues, and whatever happens with the end of the season, it's been a thrilling season.
Thank you.
I love your little stadium too. I have memories going back 50 years of seeing sports and music there, and I loved hearing you say what you like about it in terms of mass transit and that kind of thing. I also happen to own property a couple of blocks from the stadium, and I'm active in the Goose Hollow Neighborhood Association, and I know you haven't won over yet all your neighbors as fans. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what it is you really like about the stadium, and identify, are there any things you could still do to kind of win over the rest of the neighborhood so that can really be a long-term relationship, because I think it's a great place for you to be.
Good question. You know, my perception, and Ken Puckett, our senior vice president of operations, sits on the Goose Hollow board. I mean, the neighborhood's been extremely supportive of both the deal and the fact that we go overboard in all our good neighbor provisions in the agreement. The cleaning that we do around the stadium, the way that we manage everything, the way we've done everything that we've promised we're going to do. The businesses, to say they love us would be an understatement. I mean, Goose Hollow's been a veritable wasteland, sort of a neighborhood caught between, you know, just sort of in the middle of nowhere a little bit, and business success rate, especially with restaurants, has been poor historically, and you know, that's changing. They're really loving having us there. It's been a game changer for local businesses, and you know, I guess we can take our role as a member of the neighborhood and on the Goose Hollow Neighborhood Association seriously, and we continue to work with them. But I'm sure there are neighbors, to your question, that aren't Timbers fans, but in terms of Goose Hollow Neighborhood Association, you know, they're ecstatic with us. Maybe not every member. You're always going to have somebody who's got some issue, but I don't know what I can do about that.
Hi, Nate Webb, not a City Club member yet. Echo all the other sentiments about this awesome season, 3-year season ticket holder. I think one of the things that gets left out of the limelight is the impact that the Timbers have had on youth soccer, and soccer specifically in Portland. I coach at Oak Hill Soccer Club. I play in town, and 9 and 10-year-olds are absolutely obsessed with the Timbers. One of my friends runs Touristy Soccer, and they've seen their sales double, in large part with the Timbers being in town. Can you talk a little bit about the sort of future strategy of incorporating youth soccer, either potentially building out a farm team here locally, what you guys are doing with a lot of the soccer clubs? Because it's happening, I just don't think it's getting as much attention around that. So.
It's a great question. I could give a whole talk just on that, because if somebody starts with the question, why is the United States of America not one of the top-ranked U.S. men's national teams in the world? Now, again, we are the best women's national team in the world, but there's several answers to that, but one of the answers is we have not developed young soccer players in the right way historically, and that's changing. Every MLS team right now is doing its own academy and working with the youth clubs in a more proactive way, and the Timbers have centers of excellence that pull from the best academies in the state of Oregon, all over the state. So that's fundamental. That's something that needs to be fixed, is developing, bringing in better development tools and best practices on developing youth soccer from the world. MLS is actually making a really significant hire there, bringing in somebody from France to help advise teams. But Gavin's done a great job with getting our own Timbers Academy up and running in the way we're doing it. And that's something that's a longer-term payoff, but I expect there to be better American soccer players both in MLS and on the national team because of the way that we're improving the youth development system. Is that it?
I think you did it.
Thank you.
We have run out of broadcast time for further questions. We have to stop for today. Please join us next week to celebrate women's 40 years, to help us celebrate 40 years of women's leadership and service. And as we close today, please join me in offering our sincere thanks to Merritt Paulson and Craig Birnbach. Thank you very much.